I was 17. I would say working at McDonald's was my first formal job.
I was just working there because I heard that it was, McDonald's is one of the best first jobs.
I'd actually never worked fast food before I worked at McDonald's, so it was kind of crazy. I had to learn a lot of stuff at once.
How soon after you started working there did the sexual harassment begin?
Pretty much right away.
A single McDonald's restaurant in Mason, Michigan is at the heart of the first ever class action lawsuit against the company for sexual harassment. Over a dozen women say they were harassed by a former manager named Sean Banks in court documents filed last year. These women are lead plaintiffs in the suit.
He would say that I had a nice butt, that my breasts would look good.
He'd grind up on me, grab my butt, grab my sides, grab my boobs.
He grabbed me by the shirt and he pulled me back and kind of held me against this counter.
You're supposed to be working and you're being shoved. You're being hit, you're being punched, you're being grabbed. I was humiliated all the time.
Nobody around me was reacting. It was kind of they're like, oh yeah, that's how Sean is.
So you called McDonald's corporate directly?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And they didn't do anything. They said that anything that needed to be done needed to go through the franchise owner.
McDonald's doesn't actually employ the majority of its restaurant workers around the world. Independent franchise owners do. But the women in Michigan are suing not just the former franchise owner who ran their restaurant, they're suing McDonald's too, challenging the very nature of how McDonald's does business. There was a lot of really young girls working at this McDonald's restaurant at the time. We're about to go and meet Emily, who was just 16 at the time she went to work at the restaurant. Hi, Emily.
Hi.
Hey, I'm Isobel. Nice to meet you.
It's nice to meet you too.
Thank you so much for having us. Oh, look at your cats.
Yes,
They're gorgeous.
And that is Biwa.
Have you been playing some music?
I'm actually fixing this one up.
Emily Bacon isn't one of the original women who filed the lawsuit, and she's never spoken with the media before. Her story came out when she was called to give sworn testimony.
And I wrote that when I was really depressed.
Is it like a coping mechanism for you?
Oh,
Music?
absolutely. I don't think I would be alive today if I didn't have music.
When Emily worked at McDonald's, Sean Banks was a shift manager in his late 20s, more than 10 years older than her. What was your first experience with sexual harassment in McDonald's?
He asked me for my number, and the guys that it was under was you can talk to me about stuff. But
what kind of things was he saying?
I can't wait until you turn 18 so that you can go on the night shift with me and we can have sex in my car.
That's pretty explicit.
Yeah.
And what was his behavior like at the restaurant?
Oh man, he would come up behind me and touch my butt. He'd grab my boobs, he'd pull me in the freezer and kiss me.
It must have felt very powerless as a teenager dealing with this from your manager.
Oh yeah, I felt absolutely powerless. That's why I was so scared.
Did you have anything in the form of training?
I did.
Anything on sexual harassment?
No, actually. I do not remember a single time that I watched a video on sexual harassment.
In her deposition, Emily says Banks would threaten her when she resisted him. This went on for nearly a year, until one night, shortly after she turned 18, Emily says he showed up at her house uninvited.
He started asking me, he's like, why don't you just have sex with me? Why don't we just do it? And after an entire period of me saying, I don't know, or I don't really want to right now, I just said yes. I was like, fine, you know what? Go ahead. It was that kind of numb, emotionally detached, I don't care anymore, just leave me alone kind of feeling.
Did you feel present during?
No. I closed my eyes, and just laid there. And it hurt the entire time. I remember that most clearly, is that it hurt so badly.
Were you a virgin?
I was. I was.
Soon after, Emily quit. Banks no longer works for McDonald's and declined an on-camera interview, but told us on the phone that he's innocent.
You know, I'm not a rapist. I didn't sexually assault anyone. I don't want to go down as a fucking Harvey Weinstein.
Banks added he didn't pressure or coerce Emily into having sex with him, and said all the other accusations against him were false. As for the former franchise owner named Mike Dickerson, his lawyer declined to comment. In court documents, they deny the allegations and say just one woman reported her harassment once, and when she did, they investigated it. The women say they didn't even know they worked for a franchise owner.
Everyone who worked there, we just said we worked at McDonald's. We didn't really see a difference between like a franchise and a corporation.
I want McDonald's to take responsibility. If their logo is on these franchises, they should be responsible.
This case is one of at least 50 charges and lawsuits filed against McDonald's over sexual harassment since 2015. McDonald's declined multiple requests for an on-camera interview, but in court filings they denied any wrongdoing, reiterating the company didn't employ the Michigan women. McDonald's recently announced that it'll make sexual harassment training and a method of reporting complaints mandatory at all its restaurants. The company's CEO emphasized their commitment to making everyone feel welcome, comfortable, and safe at McDonald's. But that doesn't change how the franchise system works. McDonald's, the corporation, owns more than half the land their restaurants are built on. It's the franchise owners who pay McDonald's monthly rent and fees, and they're the ones who employ the workers, which means the company is legally off the hook for workers' labor conditions. It's not just McDonald's workers who say the franchise system is exploitative.
First off, I want to say McDonald's has been fooling everyone as if they're doing something for the black community when they're not. The McDonald Corporation is being sued by black current and former franchisees for decades of racial discrimination.
Hello everyone, my name is Darrell Byrd. I'm an owner-operator in Memphis, Tennessee.
Darrell and Jim Byrd have owned and operated McDonald's restaurants for decades.
I'm still trying to figure out why. Why am I struggling? Why am I paying higher rents for my restaurants? Why am I paying a greater fee to be in the same business as my white counterpart?
Now the Byrd brothers are bringing a class action lawsuit of their own against McDonald's for alleged discrimination. They're among 80 current and former black franchise owners suing the company for over $1 billion in damages. Hi, Darrell.
Yes, I'm Darrell.
Hey, Isobel. Nice to meet you.
I'm Darrell. Nice to meet you.
How
Come
are
on
you?
in. Hey.
Looking sharp.
Thank you. Welcome.
Darrell and Jim used to own 14 McDonald's restaurants. They're now down to just 4. Their lawsuit says this is because McDonald's sent them on financial suicide missions.
Yeah, this is where everything takes place right here. The thing about a location like this, it's not a very populated area yet, but it's growing. But the way we look at it as a businessman is how much am I paying for this store? You know, like here, it's a beautiful store. We do some business, but my rent is so high that you really don't make any money.
Since the 60s, McDonald's has made specific appeals to potential African-American franchise owners.
He owns a McDonald's and just got his property.
Promising them a golden opportunity to carve out a slice of the American dream.
At the end of their training program, franchisees enter the world of franchising full of the spirit of their new business and the support of their franchise family.
What made you want to get into McDonald's and be a McDonald's restaurant owner?
Back in Michigan in college, the gentleman that owned the McDonald's there, we used to frequent his restaurant, and he was kind of like Mr. McDonald's in the community and helped the people and the kids, did a lot of stuff. So I said, man, I want to do that.
When you look at it, it's like an opportunity to be with the best. And then as you get into it and you start learning the fine details of trying to run a business, and you realize that your rents are higher than other people's. And so that gap is what makes you start to think, is this systemic or just by happenstance? It's not just happenstance.
The Byrds allege that McDonald's steers black franchise owners to less profitable locations. In court documents, former owners say their average annual sales were $900,000 less than the national franchise average. With lower sales and the same or higher expenses as their counterparts, black franchise owners claim they're getting squeezed out of the system. In 1998, there were close to 400 black franchisees. In 2020, there were less than 200.
Part of it is my comrades. When you see them, you could go there and farms. They got nice ranches and farms, airplanes, hotels and everything. And I'm like, man, what's going on?
Are they all white?
Mm-hmm. All my white friends, yeah.
That must hurt. That must be...
it's a bit humiliating.
Yeah.
You know?
McDonald's would say that they have a vested interest in you guys succeeding and all their franchisees succeeding, because if you succeed, then they make money.
I don't think they care.
In my opinion, they really just have more of a vested interest in that location, generating rent and service fees for them. And if I don't make a dime, that's okay. As long as I'm able to pay the rent and service fees, I think that's what's most important.
In response to George Floyd's death last year and the Black Lives Matter movement, McDonald's released an ad that read, "They were all one of us. We see them in our customers, we see them in our crew members, we see them in our franchisees. It's why we stand for them and any other victims of systemic oppression and violence." How did you guys feel when you saw that ad?
The ad was a good ad.
You okay, Darrell?
The ad was a good ad. To talk. But you really want us to be able to walk the walk and do the right thing. At the end of the day, you got to look at the systemic problems within companies in America. And I'll tell you what, if not now, when? If not now, when?
In a statement, McDonald's lawyer Loretta Lynch said it's, quote, illogical that McDonald's would want black franchisees to fail. Franchisees offer, quote, nothing in support of this implausible theory beyond self-serving speculation, personal anecdotes, and inflammatory rhetoric. McDonald's has moved to dismiss the suit. We met with a former executive who left in 2014 after more than a decade with the company. One of Robert Johnson's main roles was to act as the liaison between minority franchise owners and McDonald's. Was there or is there a bias at an executive level?
I would say that the decision usually was to put a white operator in a white neighborhood, put a minority operator into a neighborhood that matches their ethnicity. Whether or not you call that discrimination or whether you call that poor planning, if you simply take a map of where the operators are that are operators of color, they're usually in neighborhoods that are not as profitable. There's economic disparities that exist within America. A corporation is a microcosm of America. America is a racist country. I'm sorry, but that's the reality.
We have to stand in solidarity with each other and fight.
With 2,000 franchise owners and 800,000 workers in the US alone, McDonald's has a supersized impact on the fast food industry. And President Biden weighed in on the labor front, addressing McDonald's workers directly on the campaign trail.
This is a multi-billion-dollar corporation, McDonald's. We must organize and take them on and end the abuse of power.
Biden says McDonald's and franchise owners should be held jointly responsible for workers' labor conditions, a legal change that would allow McDonald's workers to unionize across the US, which they can't do under the current franchise system. Former Labor Department official David Weil worked to reform franchising when he served under Obama. Do you think it's true that corporations who face issues with things like sexual harassment are more likely to face problems with racial discrimination and other issues?
I think, yes, I think those problems tend to travel together. Companies that cut corners might be looking the other way if there are persistent problems of harassment or discrimination in employment or advancements.
Does the everyday person grabbing their McDonald's care about who was making their burger or whether that person was discriminated against?
I think that the Fight for 15 other worker advocacy organizations have been effective in getting out the message. The fact that we have significant racial disparities in who bears the costs of some of these practices. Someone has to connect the dots. Someone has to say these things are not just different little items on your news feed. There are linkages, things that have gone on for a long time in our workplace that have led to the steady erosion of the position of millions of working people. The ability to connect those dots and to say, we can address these issues in a different way is what creates a political moment.